today's World Insight with Tian Wei, remembering the legacy of Jin Yong, who brought martial heroes to life with his epic work.
I don't like to repeat myself, so I always try something new in my writing, whether it's the characters or the plots.
And urgent need for Europe to put up its own defense strategy. Down-to-earth answers from our interview. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. The world-renowned Chinese martial arts novelist Louis Cha Liang-yong were widely known by his name, pen name in fact, Jin Yong. He passed away at the age of 94 at a hospital in Hong Kong on Tuesday. He's regarded as the greatest ever Chinese wuxia or martial arts and chivalry writer, a reputation he earned on the strength of 15 novels and short stories from 1955 to 1972. The whole nation is remembering him. Here's a look back at the life of China's Tolkien.
Sorrow and tributes have been spreading within Chinese communities across the globe after famed martial arts novelist Cha Liang-yong, better known as Jin Yong, died in Hong Kong at the age of 94. Mr. Cha's son-in-law said a literary giant was surrounded by family members when he died on Tuesday afternoon. This was confirmed by Hong Kong's Mingpao newspaper, which was founded by Mr. Cha. In 1955, he published his first martial arts novel, The Book and the Sword, in the New Evening Post, under the pen name Jin Yong. It was an instant success, and he went on to write 14 hugely popular novels and short stories. The last was The Deer and the Cauldron in 1972. Cha rewrote the Chinese wuxia or martial arts genre by adding history and popular culture to a previously formulaic field. His novels are marked by strong characterization and plot and are classified as new school wuxia.
I don't like to repeat myself, so I always try something new in my writing, whether it's the characters or the plots.
The range of his popularity, over 100 million copies sold worldwide, and countless adaptations in films and dramas, and even video games.
I think as long as there are novels in the world, the Chinese will probably still read Jin Yong's novels. I will be very satisfied if someone is still reading my novels after 50 or 60 years.
For more on the legacy of Jin Yong, we are joined in our Beijing studio Teng Jimeng, a freelance movie critic and also cultural commentator. In London, we have Paul Engels, who's an editor at MacLehose Press and also editor of Jin Yong's novel, A Hero Born. What a pleasure to have both of you gentlemen to be with us here. One of the things I would love to ask you first, Mr. Engels, is about your views of what his works are about that make people so fascinated.
Well, first, thank you very much for having me with you today. It's a very sad occasion, the death of Jin Yong, and but also an occasion to celebrate one of the world's greatest writers in our time, and I think in all times. And A Hero Born is the novel that we're speaking of. This is what we've called the first of 4 volumes of Legends of the Condor Heroes.
Right.
And I think that Jin Yong's appeal is partly in the way that he brings history to a popular audience. The Chinese history is fascinating, multifaceted, it goes over thousands of years, and Jin Yong's books spread across this history.
Which part
and
of history?
It's the most accessible way.
Which part of history, Mr. Engels? For example, the books that you are holding, which part of history that fascinates people? What part of history is he rather man-made, or is it a copy of the real history? And why is that people are so fascinated by it?
Well, I can't presume to say why he was fascinated. I imagine that he lived through a time of very interesting times. He lived through the war, the Second World War, and what followed. And the Legends of the Condor Heroes, as we know, is set in the time when the Jin and the Song dynasties were vying for mastery of China. And I think, for me, this is a fascinating period because you also have the involvement of Genghis Khan and the Mongols, and because his books show how rich the culture was in China at that time. For thousands of years, people have been working on arts such as calligraphy and the martial arts. The weapons and warfare they had were very advanced for the time, and the cities were huge. The Grand Canal, which ran across China, had been there for many years already, and that was a huge feat of man-made work on the topography of the world, and that nothing could match it in Western Europe at the time, and that's partly fascinating. Even though in Western Europe we had,
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Engels. It seems that you have given us a very general impression. I thought you probably could have some stories to tell us. Maybe wait for later. Professor Tang, you've been studying your notes earlier. But one thing you do not need to study the notes is people's fascination about his novels. I'm sure you have been reading some of his works back in the university days. Many of us, you know, under the quilt at night, we try to use a flashlight in order to read, because those books were actually kind of taboo during the school days, because the teachers does not want students to read too much so-called unuseful or not useful books. Professor Tang.
Well, absolutely, you're right. I think this is almost like something that I always look back to these university days. I mean, reading under a bed cover, I mean, under the table, and for fear of being discovered, to read like this decadent and feudal sort of superstitious.
Part guilty, part fascinating, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But Professor, why his works are so fascinating to you, and so many around China? I mean, worldwide, his books sold 300 million. Well, and in China, probably much more than that number.
Well, first thing first, I think it's because the great literary tradition that he tried to revive after the kind of vandalism, the kind of elimination of this Asian heritage part of the culture, especially classical literature, since the 1960s, made basically the Cultural Revolution. And so, first thing first is the literature. Secondly, it's history, it's politics, and for example, most of Jin Yong's works actually help us on this journey back into history, the history of Jin, Yuan, and also Ming, and all these great historical stories being revived through these great characters, through martial arts, which is the third point I would like to touch upon. I think martial arts being revitalized by this great author, using so much and so many of these great literary allusions, historical names, and also the great and powerful martial arts skill names.
That's right, but I have to say, Professor Tang, there's one thing we don't want the audience to mistake, and that is the things that he's been writing in the book are not necessarily a real copy of the history.
No, they are fantasies.
There are a lot of fantasy stories related to maybe minor facts of what happened at certain time and became a beautiful novel. Having said that, though, we see very much, Mr. Engels, in his books, there's something called the Jianghu. I hope when you are translating and working on these books, you will also understand that phrase, which means literally rivers and lakes. But actually it means a sphere in which characters, men and women, will be able to seek justice and love and wisdom in an entangled world eventually. How important is it, Mr. Engels, when you are reading his works, that this tradition, this idea has become?
It's a fundamental concept of the works, but I for me, I think it's... A lot of people have asked me how a Western reader is going to understand this if they don't understand these fundamental concepts, for example. And I think that it's quite universal, I think, to how we behave with each other around the world. I find there's lots of parallels with the European idea of chivalry, and going as far as the behaviour of the characters in the works of Alexandre Dumas, who I believe that Jin Yong is often compared to. So it's the context with which we view the characters' actions. So we have a certain expectation that they will behave in certain ways, and a lot of the drama comes from when they differ from those norms.
What about that for you, Professor Tang? I mean, for Chinese gentlemen, jianghu has been a phrase and a fascination. And yet, is it only man-made, or there's something like that? Or there's something similar to it, but we could never grasp it, and that's why we're so fascinated about everything described in the novels of Jin Yong.
Well, I think that jianghu is almost like a quintessential Chinese concept, deeply rooted in the traditional and psychological, perhaps the psyche of the nation, which really, the concept of which really hold on our popular imagination. It has three meanings to me. First thing first, it is associated with martial arts and chivalry. I mean, this imagined world and perhaps underworld of a group of huskers and also martial arts masters traveling across different landscapes to compete and to fight and to win, in a sense, to address wrongs and, in a sense, to profess the greatness, and for the people in and outside this very particular world. And secondly, I think jianghu also means the realm outside the imperial reach, the kind of a world in which that people would operate outside the existing law and order. And thirdly, I think it is also a cultural concept in which that means that people can freely play a full play of their imagination, meaning freedom, meaning almost a free-willing freedom that allow one to travel and to do and to think freely.
Right. Very interesting. Joining us, we also have from Boston, Petrus Liu, who is an associate professor at Boston University from the BU. He's also the author of Stateless Subjects, Chinese Martial Arts, Literature, and Post-Colonial History. Sounds very academic, but Mr. Liu, I'm sure you have your own understanding of the word jianghu and the kind of image and imagination Jin Yong has managed throughout decades to create for the Chinese.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so in my work, I actually translated jianghu as statelessness. And I didn't catch part of the conversation because I just joined in late because of the technical difficulty. But I think the important thing here is that a lot of people think that in martial arts fiction, we're the kind of fiction is popular and anti-statist. But I think it is actually elaborating a kind of new ethics that is not centered on the formation of the state or nation-building programs, and it's not nationalist. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, is it a nation-state issue, Professor Tang? You see, many of the works portrayed particular characters, most well-known, such as Guo Jing and some of the others, in the novels of Jin Yong, are actually about a nation-state concept, about Chinese, the history of the Chinese throughout thousands of years. So is he a nationalist, or is he a romantic author who has been trying to inspire himself through the ups and downs of history?
I think he wears three caps. I think first thing first, he's a novelist, and secondly, I think he's a historian, and lastly, I think he's also a politician, perhaps, because he's heavily involved in politics ever since the 1950s by starting Mingbao and also writing such great history. And so in this sense, I think it is nation building. It is part of searching for the cultural and political identity of a nation in transition and transformation, especially since 1978. And so, to me, Jin Yong is a kind of a virtuoso. I mean, deeply involved in interpreting and creating, and sometimes, I hope, reinventing China.
Interestingly speaking, if you look at some of the most important quotes coming from Jin Yong, the writer himself, Mr. Engels, he's been talking about life is like a fight, then you leave it quietly. You see a lot of very, shall I say, a very romantic way, but certainly also a way of bravery that he has been illustrating in his way of life, and also reflect that in his novels. How much of it are actually remaining in the imaginations of the Chinese, and therefore it's absolutely beautiful when they see that in the novels? How much of it are the reality of the Chinese lives? These are fascinating questions, isn't it, Mr. Engels?
It is a fascinating question. I'm afraid I wasn't able quite to hear the full context of it. Could you just repeat it again for me?
Well, okay. He says something like, life is like a fight, then you leave it quietly. Obviously, you see a very chivalrous spirit, and so also a man of bravery, and also a man of vision in a way. But the question is this a romantic version of what the reality is, or this is part of reality, Mr. Engels?
I think it can. I think it's certainly both. I think it is. I mean, to me, his writings certainly are a romantic version of historical events with different characters and added characters, but I think they have. When something is as popular as Jin Yong's works have been, they begin to not so much alter reality, but they certainly alter people's perceptions of reality. So, and people begin to live by what the tenets in his books. They define themselves against it. People who have grown up wanting to be like his characters or wanting to be not like his villains. So when something is so popular, I think where romanticization and reality, I think the lines between them blur a little bit.
Is it, Mr. Engel, Mr. Liu? Glad you're joining us through satellite.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Would you like to respond
I'm sorry?
to what? Would you like to respond to what the other panelist has to say, or can you hear me?
Yeah, I only caught the second half of, I think,
Okay,
Paul's,
so let me
comments.
ask you whether it is romantic version of reality that Mr. Jin Yong created in his novels, or actually people are looking at the jianghu, all of these chivalry concepts, and in actually the realities of Chinese life. Mr. Liu, very briefly from you.
Oh, I think, okay, I see, thank you. Yeah, well, I think, first, we want to think about the notion of chivalry. I think, that even though, martial arts fiction is translated as martial arts and chivalrous fiction, it's not about propagating a fixed idea of what it means to be heroic or brave for people to imitate. Rather, I think this kind of fiction is extremely complex in terms of plot and language, and it creates scenes of ethical dilemmas for you to consider, rather than values and norms for you to imitate. So, for example, I have often been fascinated by a parallel between two different novels that Jin Yong has written. In one scenario, the hero, the protagonist, is asked to join a faction that he was raised to believe as evil. And in the other novel, there is a very similar situation. And what happens in the two stories are completely different. So I don't think, there is a fixed message that Jin Yong wants to send out. Rather, he wants to question how we have come to accept certain beliefs and values as absolute standards of morality. And, and also think that throughout 20th century, there's a prejudice against martial arts fiction because people thought that, this kind of fiction, was really a remnant of feudal China and traditional value. And in the early 20th century, Chinese critics, actually said that the existence of martial arts fiction was a reason why we couldn't have a revolution. It was a deflection of the revolutionary consciousness of the people, and providing an escapist fantasy. I think, that martial arts, fiction has been grossly misunderstood.
That's a wonderful way when you put it that way. It certainly leads us to the next debate about whether the martial art novels, such as those written by Jin Yong, have revived the people's fascination about the so-called traditional culture, or it is creating a mirage or a fake version of the traditional culture. That's a very interesting question, isn't it, Professor Tang?
Yeah, I mean, Jin Yong has been always a master in terms of creating a mirror. I mean, this is almost like a long-term Chinese tradition on the part of literati such as Jin Yong. I think he would use literature as a mirror to reflect upon this long-gone past and to allow us to see a glimpse of, to seek a glimpse of the present. And so, to many people, I think that Jin Yong is 影射, I mean, shooting from the shadows. I mean, using literature to comment on the present-day society and any society, perhaps back in the past, in the future, and lead us that may lead us to a unknown future in this sense.
Unknown future, isn't that fascinating? However, we do know that Jin Yong's novels were not just influential in Chinese-speaking countries, but also translated into Korean, English, Japanese, French, Vietnamese, Indonesian, and more. His books sold 300 million, as we mentioned earlier, worldwide. But crucial thing about Jin Yong's works is that, take a look at the very first character of the names of his novels, and put together they become a beautiful Chinese couplet. Translating into English, it goes like this: whirling slow blankets the sky, and I hunt the white bears, laughing as I write legends of chivalry and romance. Isn't he quite a man? Having heard this quote coming from the very first character of all his novels named. So, once again, I want to go to you, Mr. Liu. The Chinese language itself. Today, what we speak is very different from what people spoke earlier in the last few centuries. And the beauty of the Chinese language, particularly the ancient language, is very much different from the rhythm of our language today. How do we see Jin Yong's function in that way to bridge and link the past and the present?
Yes, that's a great question. Jin Yong has actually once said that Lu Xun, Ba Jin, Lao She, the revered fathers of modern Chinese literature, didn't actually write modern Chinese literature. They merely wrote Western literature in the Chinese language. And that's a very provocative claim, and I think there's some truth to that actually, because Jin Yong is, in my mind, the only author who has successfully revitalized and preserved the traditional Chinese vernacular tradition of linked chapter fiction. And there are all kinds of political reasons why that tradition has come to be devalued and challenged in early 20th century China, when people embraced Western norms of and conventions of literary techniques. But Jin Yong didn't give up. He wanted to continue and expand on what is interesting and unique about the Chinese literary tradition. And I think that also says something about the difficulty and complexity of his language and the reasons why we haven't yet fully translated all of his works. A lot of people actually say that Jin Yong is untranslatable.
Right. That actually is a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we are running out of time for this discussion, despite of some of the technical difficulties. But still, thank you so much. I learned a lot through the conversations we are having right now. Teng Jimeng, Paul Angus, and Patrice Liu. We hope we are going to discuss this in the near future. This is not just a remembrance, it's a celebration of Mr. Jin Yong's works, and certainly the literature tradition of martial arts movie and novels. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. Still to come on the program, urgent need for Europe to put up its own defense strategy. Down-to-earth answers from our interview right after this break. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The fact that the last Cold War did not destroy the human race had a lot to do with the security treaties reached among countries, particularly those on nuclear security. But things apparently are changing dramatically recently, with the U.S. President Donald Trump provokingly announced a withdrawal from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Many believe it literally could be the very beginning of a new arms race. Security scholars worldwide are concerned, including Nicholas Swanstrom, the director and co-founder of the Institute for Security and Development Policy from Sweden. On the sideline of the Xiangshan Forum earlier held in Beijing, he told me that he's worried about European security situations as a result, and cautiously watching the transatlantic relations. The U.S. withdrawal from one of the most significant strategic arms control deals in the world. As we know, from the end of the Cold War, that's why the deal was signed then, because it's mutually destructive. The question is, what's next? Because when you scrap off the old, or rather destroy the existing, without a new one, that is the most dangerous period of time. So I'm questioning about this time. How is our time going to be characterized by these kinds of decisions?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think this is, we haven't seen the end of this, of course, but this is in line with what Donald Trump is trying to do. He's very disruptive. He is having a policy of taking these decisions to create sort of insecurity, to renegotiate and trying to get better deals. But if you're going to be very honest, if he can destroy the world 10 times or 50 times or 100 times, in my book, probably once would be sufficient. So this is an extremely unfortunate. And it gives leverage to other states. So what if the United States doesn't obey international legislation, why should others do?
Right.
So I can understand he wants to renegotiate trade deals and all that. That's the most of a national interest. But when it comes to arms deals, it has much wider consequences and it is much more severe.
So after the U.S. withdrawal from this deal, things would also change, as you may understand. The bigger background has changed.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's, the initial demand from our, DPRK was, of course, that we have no trust.
Yeah.
Now they see evidence of an erratic decision-making process in the United States. So that of course, will trigger it. But this reaches much more broader implications as well. I mean, you come to Japan. What should Japan do? Can Japan, if North Korea now will keep its nuclear weapon, should they have a nuclear weapon? What should Europe do? Can we trust the United States? And personally, I think that we need a stronger intra-European military cooperation that are capable of funding ourselves, preferably in close contact with the United States to NATO. But I think that we have to realize that the United States might not always be at our side. So I do see a much more fend-for-yourself mentality around the world.
But what would that mean for countries like yours, Sweden, or some of the other relatively smaller European countries?
Well, I think that it's going to be a discussion of whether or not we need to join NATO. Now most of the smaller states are in NATO. Sweden and Finland is not.
Yes.
But I think this also raises the debate, certainly with a more aggressive Russia under Putin. That has sort of raised the debate. Should Finland and Sweden join NATO? And we're not, as a Swede, I'm not very concerned over Russia invading Sweden, but I'm much more concerned over cyber attacks or other attacks on our neighbors, Estonia, Lithuania, etc. So I think this will raise the question, do we need to join NATO? Or can we have enough courage to create a European defense cooperation that actually has muscles?
On the one hand, many of the European countries, Sweden included, having had long-time allied relationship with the United States. But on the other hand, the recent events does raise huge questions about this tradition and about the nature of the United States going forward. what is the best scenario and a plan for countries like yours?
Well, first of all, I think we need to make a distinction with President Trump and the United States.
Yes.
I think the transatlantic link after Donald Trump will go back to more of its normal. It will be affected, of course, but the cooperation...
Is that wishful thinking? You think about him 4 years, probably 8 years. Nobody knows.
No, I think about 8 years. I do think President Trump is very likely to get a second term. And that will affect the relations with Europe. But nevertheless, we do share a lot of commonality. That said, I think what we need to do, and I think what we have to realize that as a small country in Europe, it's increasingly difficult to stand alone. We do need to increase our defense spending, but we also need to increase that regional defense. We need to start acting as the European Union. And which we have, of course, the economic part, but we also need that defense treaty.
And that is very different from NATO.
That is very different from NATO. I think that the Europeans need to learn and realize that we also need to fend for ourselves. And Europe's interest, and this is where I'm a bit critical of Europe, and I'm a very strong European believer, we need to have our own interest. We need to define what does Europe want, and we need to start seeking to get what we want. That's the same with the Belt and Road. We should engage the Belt and Road with our own interest.
Yes.
And that is not the American interest, and that might not be Chinese interest.
Nicholas, help us to understand one of the most important things that you're doing, which is about research about the Silk Road, both the ancient Silk Road and the modern version of it.
Well, when we look at it, the trade lines was tremendously important, and the interaction culturally, but also scientifically, was tremendous. And when we look at Central Asia, it was really the cradle of ideas. And I think if we can come back to that and to re-establish a communication, and we were talking about win-win, as President Xi has done, I think this is very important. Not only about winning economic benefits, but also collaborating against research, culture, ideas, values. That, I think, would be a great historical lesson. And I think we can learn a lot from the ancient people. And unfortunately, we don't know our history well enough always.
It's a very selective version that we are reading right now.
It is very selective.
As the historians would say.
Yeah, and we tend to focus on the challenges. And I think we also need to be focusing on the positive. But it was interesting, of course, when the Mongols controlled the region, it was one of the safest routes to travel. There was a large part of security. People could bring down transportation costs. That is not the case anymore. So I think what we also need to focus now is to learn from the history and create that historical security on the ancient Silk Road.
But the question is, do we have enough trust?
True. I mean, the lack of trust is a problem. I don't think we can have that today. There's no such space for one single strong actor guaranteeing it.
You mean country?
A country. I mean, we had, of course, the Mongol guaranteeing the security historically, but what we need to do now is to build trust between Europe, between China, between Russia, and that we collectively can build that security.
And those in Central Asian countries, of course.
Well, Central Asian countries, absolutely. And, but there's more trust among the Central Asian states. What we see now is that when they initially became states, they were very distrustful of each other. But we see a regional cooperation. I think the distrust is much more against China, against Russia, against Europe. And they want to keep their independence. So we, as larger entities, has to be able to come in there and be partners.
What is the security aspect of this BRI as we talk about it?
Well, I mean, I'm extremely worried about the soft security threats when it comes to environment, it comes to economic development. When we look at a lot of the environmental degradation in Central Asia, creates, of course, social instability in these countries. And these are the ones that we need to get together. And I would, of course, like to have a global sort of view on this. But I do think when it comes to that, it is China and it is Europe that will take the main needs to take the main responsibility.
Besides Eurasian security and the Belt and Road Initiative, Mr. Swanstrom is also a longtime observer of the Korean Peninsula. Big steps have been taken to ease tensions along the two countries' borders, as well as the dismantlement of the DPRK's arsenal of nuclear weapons. Take a look.
It's been a year of firsts for diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. The two leaders from the north and south have so far met 3 times in April, May, and September. U.S. President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un met at a historical summit in Singapore in June. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Kim 3 times in the first half of the year. The DPRK has carried out a moratorium on nuclear and missile tests, dismantling structures at missile test sites. And South Korea and the DPRK have seized hostile acts against each other, held reunions for families separated by the Korean War, and agreed to begin reconnecting rail and road links. South Korean President Moon Jae-in said on Thursday that Kim Jong-un would soon pay a visit to Seoul. Russian President Vladimir Putin is likely to meet Kim very soon, and many expect the second Kim-Trump summit to take place at the end of the year.
What do you make of the latest development about DPRK's desire to negotiate, particularly with the United States this time? Will Pyongyang be able to get what it wants?
I think DPRK has already gotten what it wants.
Which is?
A division of interest. They have had a...
The division of interest has started in the 6-party talks. It's been a long time. It's no secret at all.
Well, the thing is ROK and the United States are today very divided. So what we see, the interest of ROK, now they have already engaged North Korea to an extent that is no return back. The United States is not on the train. DPRK has engaged China, and China, United States, China, Russia, and DPRK went out and said, we need to lift the sanctions, we need to give them something.
Right.
So now the international community is very divided on how to deal with DPRK. This gives DPRK an enormous leverage. So the diplomatic development we've seen from the Olympic Games to today has been all in favor of DPRK.
But President Trump is looking at it a very different way. He's looking at it as he's a political legacy in a way, or geopolitical legacy. And likely, as we know, earlier reports suggest that after midterm election, there's likely to be even more summit right after the Singapore summit between Trump and Kim. So it seems that everybody got its share. Everybody got what it wants. Isn't that a wonderful thing?
Well, this is a fantastic thing if you want North Korea to have nuclear weapons. No, I do think what happens now is that...
But North Korea already said they would come clean, right, if they have the guarantee for peace.
Exactly, and security.
Yes, security.
And this is the thing, that if you're going to have the security guarantees that DPRK is asking, the United States has to leave ROK. It has to show that it has no military interest. It has to show it has a normalization of relations. Maybe even has to leave Japan. I mean, these are demands that we're not going to see in the coming 5, 10 years at least. So I think what we're going to facing is really a reduction of test sites, dismantling of test sites, reduction maybe even of long-range ballistic missiles, but we'll see them keeping the nuclear weapons for the foreseeable future.
Having said that, though, I have to let you help us understand really what is happening on the ground, because you've been frequenting DPRK.
Yes.
What you have seen over the past 15 years, what you have seen since the new administration comes into power, what you have seen over the past 1 year particularly, more intense interaction between the North and the South, even the South President visiting the North, giving a speech in the Parliament, on the street with President Kim, in the car, waving to the crowds in DPRK. It's something that you have never seen, at least on TV footage. So, Nicholas, what exactly is happening? Are things really changing?
it has, everything has changed and nothing has changed in a sense.
Interesting, but very philosophical. I have to figure that out.
Yeah, no, the thing is, Chairman Kim Jong-un, he has changed a lot. He's been very engaging with the international community. He has brought in a new philosophy. Mm-hmm. His economic policy actually is giving results. When I walk around shops in Pyongyang, there's more merchandise than has been before, locally produced.
It's not just for foreigners like you.
No, it's not for foreigners. On the countryside, it's different. We have still a huge lack of resources and everything. So there's a thing here between Pyongyang, bigger cities, and countryside. But of course, he is different. But when we're looking at these changes now, we're standing at a crossroad. Either we continue on the old path, that North Korea continues to keep this, they provoke, and then we have international sanctions, and we're back in the same fold.
The same cycle.
Same cycle. But, and I'm quite optimistic, I would give it a 20-25% chance that we will see a Kim Jong-un who is saying, listen, I'm actually going to give you some of the nuclear weapons. And he might actually show that constructiveness. And if he does that, we're in a very different cycle. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you said, we have not seen this sort of engagement before. This is something very optimistic.
You mean the ball is totally in his court? I worry about the other side too, whether the rest of the international community, the United States included, will be really getting constructive attitude in following up the process that we are already beginning, apparently.
I don't think they will offer enough. And I think what the ball is really on the Korean side, North and South, if they can bring this process in a different direction, that's what I think is hopeful. But I would not hold my breath to see a constructive move from Donald Trump. He might do something for the midterm elections, absolutely. But I think if we're going to look at long-lasting, constructive policy, we have to look at the Koreans, North and South.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.